Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 25th of January 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us
Northern Exposure,
which is what I think we have in the studio.
You're a bit cold, Brian.
I am a bit cold, yes.
Okay.
I am a bit cold.
Well, don't worry. The lights will warm it up shortly, but let's warm things up with this then. So here's legislation.gov.uk. The Health Protection Coronavirus England number 3 regulations have been extended until July. Well, there wasn't too much noise about that. I think a couple of small stories in the press over the weekend. This, of course, doesn't mean that the lockdown itself has been extended, Brian. It just means that the government has, well, David, maybe I should bring you into the programme at this point. Does this mean that the government has the legal right to extend the lockdown as it sees fit until at least the 31st of July?
Well, so it's claiming to have. Legal rights are all based, obviously, on the premise that the threat from the virus is such that all of our normal rights can be removed because it's a life and death situation. And of course, if that's a lie, then everything that the government has done since the very start is unlawful, and some people could be going to jail. But as they seem to be claiming, it's going to be legal until July to imprison us more.
Yes, indeed, but they're going to imprison us in our minds more by ramping up the fear even further. So let's start off with new variants. And Matt Hancock, over the weekend, 77 cases of South African COVID variant have been found in the UK, 9 of the Brazilian variant, and experts warning that new vaccines might be needed every year. And I'm saying that really this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody because, of course, the model that they're aiming for here is very much the flu vaccine model. So that's what the Mail was saying. It was also in other media as well. But up in Scotland, David, here's the Herald. Vaccine fears as South African coronavirus hits Scotland. So it's all about fear.
It's all about fear. 3 identified cases. Oh, wow. Coronavirus variant first detected in South Africa, which it is feared is more resistant to the COVID vaccine, the Herald has learned. Details emerged as the Health Secretary, that's Matt Hancock, UK Health Secretary, said there was evidence that the South African variant, although we are not sure of this data, reduces by about 50% the vaccine efficiency. So believe that, if you will. There is evidence, but we're not sure of the data, and it might be bad, and it might not, but be afraid.
Be very afraid, but it doesn't end there. The Express then, government accused of using COVID fear tactics to inflate anxiety levels of British public. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but the UK column was accusing the government of using COVID fear tactics to inflate anxiety levels of the British public, I think in March or April of 2020, on the basis of the Spy B minutes to Sage group, basically saying that that's exactly what they were going to do.
Well, this is the Express has caught up with us. I think it was either April or early May we reported on this, but now word is getting out to the readership of the Express. A group of 47 psychologists have claimed this amounts to a strategic decision to inflate the fear levels of the British public, which is exactly what we reported back in May, which states it's ethically murky, yes, and then some, and has left people too afraid to leave their homes for medical appointments, which is very true and is obviously killing people. The group, led by former NHS consultant psychologist Dr. Gary Sidley, the experts have written to the British Psychological Society claiming the strategy is morally questionable.
Yes, morally questionable. I think it goes beyond being morally questionable, doesn't it?
Well, morally questionable. This is a psychological attack on the British public. It is an attack. That's the reality of it. But I think we've got to stress that it is really great to see these psychologists now coming forward to question what's going on, to have professionals coming to the fore and saying, we've got questions to ask, we're not happy with what's going on. This is a very good sign, and those people should get support from the wider public.
David, the article goes on to say, in response, the government has vehemently denied using covert techniques. Well, of course, the techniques haven't been covert at all. They've been absolutely in our faces.
Well, this is it. I mean, so the government's denying something they weren't accused of, which is not tremendously convincing. They said the campaigns have been transparent and necessary to set out clear instructions, but they've admitted to communicating public information campaigns at a rate of 17 a week. 17 a week! During the peak of the pandemic in order to reach an estimated 95% of adults. And this is all relating to the minutes of the SAGE group meeting on the 22nd of March 2020, as we reported back in April and May.
Yes, indeed. Where does that take us? Well, COVID 2020 saw the most excess deaths since World War II, is what the BBC was reporting just over a week ago, at least on their main UK website. We called that fake news. And even in the article, it went on to make the point that once age and size of population are taken into account, are at their worst level for a little over a decade only. Well, in fact, actually, once age and size of population are taken into account, if you look over 20 years rather than 10, then 2020 only appears 9th on that list. But David, in Scotland, the BBC is up to the same trick. COVID in Scotland, peacetime excess deaths highest since 1891.
Yes, I think this may be the most grievous example of fake news that the BBC have ever done. It's absolutely appalling. So it's worth just noting how they've done this. So the figures show there was 6,324 excess deaths, 11% higher than the 5-year average. So they're calculating excess deaths based on the preceding 5-year average. Now, we know that from the information published in the UK column last week, that the death rate in the UK has been falling steadily until about 8 years ago when it stopped falling at the end of the Great Recession and the financial crash. So we've got it then flatlined. So the 5-year average, for the first time in living memory, is actually steady rather than continuously falling. So when you're comparing current figures back 5 years only, you're getting an entirely false result. They then fail to correct for population size and fail to correct for age profile. So this is simply looking at the stats to see how a headline can be milked to frighten people. It's completely deceptive and completely without foundation. It's fake news of the most grievous sort.
And David, I wonder. I just noted the Russian flu. That going back to 1891, those nasty Russians were at it again. I'd like to see a bit more information on the basis for that classification as Russian flu.
Okay, but the Telegraph here reporting more children admitted to hospital for mental health than medical reasons, leading paediatrician says.
Yeah, so we're seeing here the effect of the fear. We've been running fear consistently. We're telling people they're going to die. We're spinning figures in deceptive and confusing ways to convince people they're going to die, convince them not to leave their homes. And it's having an effect. It's having a dreadful effect. So we're seeing here for the first time, this is Professor Russell Viner, President of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, said that the phenomenon that paediatricians have seen across the UK is seen since the start of the pandemic. And this is entirely new. The number of children admitted to hospital for mental health reasons now outstrips those for medical conditions. This is appalling. We are frightening our children into illness.
Yes, and of course we need to highlight once again Dr. Bruce Scott's fantastic article on the UK column, Psychological Attack on the UK.
And anecdotal addition to that is that a few days ago I was speaking to a lady who works in counselling and mental health. She said that she was absolutely swamped and that all of her professional colleagues also working in mental health were swamped, and other friends who are connected to mental health across the country were saying that there was an unprecedented number of people coming forward with mental health problems as a result of lockdown. And when I gently said, well, we just don't seem to be seeing the government showing any attention to this, she said, no, it's unbelievable that the government doesn't appear interested at all. So It's just straw poll of one lady, but she was clearly very concerned, and she was particularly interested in why the government was showing no interest in the damage its lockdown policies were doing.
Yes. Well, let's head over to Davos then, because the Davos agenda starts today. This is the equivalent of the annual Davos get-together, which is probably more significant now than Bilderberg and some of these other meetings are these days. But of course, they can't have a real conference this year, Brian, because of COVID. It's a virtual event. They're hosting the real Davos event, the real face-to-face Davos event, I think in September, October time in the Far East. So what are they talking about? Well, let's just have a quick look. This is just for today. So trust in vaccines, how to build confidence, and exclusive expert briefing on the global implications of the COVID-19 crisis and the road ahead. As mass vaccination campaigns roll out across the globe, surveys indicate that only 73% of people would get a COVID-19 vaccine if available, with the number as low as 40% in some countries. So this is of great concern to them. They want to do something about that. What else? A new coalition for workplace racial justice. They're launching that. Then we've got targets and pathways to economic transformation. This is, of course, the Great Reset economy. The New Green Deal is very much part of the agenda here. For today, building net zero cities is on the agenda for today. I think that was this morning as well. But the keynote here, healthy futures, building crisis resilient healthcare systems in a post-COVID world. So these are the types of topics that they're talking about. And this last one is quite interesting because, of course, the third world in particular are getting a bit upset about the fact that they can't get access to COVID-19 vaccines and drugs. They have been calling since last October for particularly the Indian and South African governments, 8 other countries as well, asking the World Trade Organization to encourage the lifting of patents and other intellectual property rights for COVID-19 diagnostics, drugs and vaccines for the duration of the pandemic. The World Trade Organization hasn't really moved on this. They're not making a decision. The UK, France, Germany and the United States are against it. They say that they have been doing deals with big drug producers and therefore there's no real need for drugs to be made available to the third world at less cost. So really we want to monopolize pharma. It's all about the new health infrastructure that's being built. Well, look, let's have a look at this tweet that Corey Morningstar put out this morning because I think this is really insightful. April 9th, 2020, World Economic Forum website. We're conducting arguably the largest psychological experiment ever. January 2021, injecting humans with mRNA technology. We're conducting arguably the largest human biology experiment ever. So what's she talking about? Well, first of all, on April the 9th, 2020, the World Economic Forum had this article, "Lockdown is the world's biggest psychological experiment, and we will pay the price." I recommend people go and read that. But then she was making this point that this is really the subject of Davos at the moment, the vaccine revolution. The headline in Time for this month's Time magazine, mRNA technology gave us the first COVID-19 vaccines. It could also upend the drug industry. And so if anybody wants to know why intellectual property rights aren't being waived for the third world at the moment, is because the drug companies see this absolutely as a literal revolution in the healthcare market. So this article saying RNA can also be engineered, as Jennifer Doudna and others discovered, to target genes for editing using the CRISPR system adapted from bacteria. RNA can guide scissor-like enzymes to specific sequences of DNA in order to eliminate or edit a gene. More controversially, it says in this article, no criticism, just controversy. More controversially, CRISPR could be used to create designer babies with inheritable genetic changes. The COVID-19 pandemic that they claim killed more than 1.8 million people in 2020 will not be the final plague. However, thanks to the new RNA technology, our defenses against future plagues are likely to be immensely faster and more effective. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Brian and David, but clearly at Davos, they are very excited about this new prospect of immense, unlimited perhaps profits available through these new technologies.
The profits there, of course, billions of profits. Did I catch that correctly? So we're not a pandemic, we're plague. This is a plague.
Yes.
Right. So without any real data to back up that new classification of the fear factor, we're now into future plagues.
David, have you any thoughts on that?
It'll be a perpetual plague. You know, as in the war in 1984 was never meant to be won. What we've learned from Big Pharma is that none of their campaigns against disease are ever meant to be won. They're meant to be perpetual. And this one, which is based on so little and so much fear and so much hype, stands to make them so much profit that this too will become perpetual. And it will be left to those with courage to actually ask the question about where's the proof, where's the risk, where's the assessment of effectiveness of the treatments, and where is the proper assessment of the long-term effects on the population. Remember, after 75 years, we still don't know if the decision to vaccinate the elderly against influenza actually helps anyone at all.
Well, indeed. But finally, on Davos then, well, I'm not sure whether this is Cointelegraph or whether it should be Cointel or something like that. But anyway, Cointelegraph here, the headline is Cryptocurrency Makes World Economic Forum's Davos Agenda. And they're getting very exciting. The digital currencies are now very much on the list. Well, of course, we know that the European Union in particular is very, very keen to get the digital euro off the ground. The Bank of England, the same for most other currencies around the world. Digital is the way we're going, David. And of course, digital means unlimited.
Digital means unlimited because it's not even limited by the number of printing presses that you have, as it used to be. Normally, if a printing press broke down during a hyperinflation, the inflation rate would slow. This isn't going to happen now. The money supply and the value of money is in for, shall we say, a very severe test, because we've destroyed our economies in many ways. We've been printing money to cover the gaps, and the politicians and governments are now thinking that they have the magic money tree. They have the ability to simply buy people, because we can print the money out of nothing and we can buy loyalty. We can pay people to stay at home. We might even pay them for positive COVID tests. We can pay them for anything we want, without having to worry about where the money comes from, until eventually it will all collapse. So when it collapses, we need something to put in its place. This is a big part of the Great Reset.
Yes, indeed.
I think you might have lost your earphone there, Dave. Oh, you picked it up. Okay, that's fine.
Right. Now let's move on to this. This is a report from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. It's called Electrifying the UK and the Want of Engineering. And I strongly recommend people have a look at it. We're going to look at electric cars here because this is one of the points that they're making. So we want to electrify the UK. This is, of course, all to do with the Green New Deal. So let's just look at some statistics. The equivalent energy stored in a conventional car filled with approximately 10.5 gallons of fuel needs a battery the weight of at least half a ton to make up for that. If we replace the gasoline with electricity, the production of those batteries is extremely energy intensive and includes mining and processing huge amounts of copper, aluminium, and lithium. Okay, so this next batch of stats is just for the UK. Okay, this is conversion of the UK car fleet as it stands at the moment. Okay, would require 200% of the annual global production of cobalt. It would require 75% of the annual global production of lithium carbonate. It would require more than 50% of the annual global production of copper. And it would require around 100% of the annual global production of neodymium. Okay, so that's another rare earth. Let's look at the EU then. Conversion of the EU car fleet by 2050. This is the goal of 2050 for this. 26 million electric vehicles produced annually would be required to replace the EU car fleet by 2050. 1,700%, that's 1,700% of the annual global production of cobalt would be required to do that. 600% of the annual global production of lithium carbonate, 400% of the annual global production of copper, and 800% of the annual global production of neodymium. Now, the point here is that neodymium is only mined in China, because China is the only country, it seems, that is prepared to put up with the pollution that is generated by that. But my question then is, where are these raw materials going to come from? Now, everybody that's watching this must recognize that they can't come from anywhere because they don't exist, or we don't have the capability to mine them. Or if we do mine them, we're going to destroy the planet, which seems counterproductive to the narrative that the green agenda is trying to pursue. If we move to electricity as the main source of energy for cars, well, where does that leave us with respect to electricity for heating? Because at the same time, we're expected to replace gas boilers from 2025 onwards, and by 2040, we're not going to be putting gas boilers into new build homes anymore. This is an older article, but this is still on the books as far as the government is concerned. They still want to do this. This is why Boris Johnson was recently talking about heat pumps for new build homes and so on. But on top of that, let's consider this. I haven't shown this graphic in quite some time, and I haven't updated it for the latest situation with respect to the amount of money that's been borrowed by the government for covering the costs of COVID. The point that I want to highlight on this graph is if you look at the situation with state pensions, there's a £5.2 trillion black hole with respect to state pensions. Now, the way that the British pension system works, it's a Ponzi scheme. It requires people to be earning money, producing tax, paying tax to the government so that the government can then pay that out again in pensions to old age pensioners. But there's the obligations that are in place already for the current population come to £5.2 trillion, and that's basically unpayable. So what happens to pensions? Do we reduce the amount of pensions, or are we reducing the population in order to make sure that we don't have that demand on pensions? And then, of course, we've got this, education. This is the Mail. Now children might not return to school until after Easter. Gavin Williamson will not rule out pupils going back into classrooms after February half-term within days. And so what are we doing here? We're destroying the education of an entire generation. The point that Patrick Henningsen has made to me is, of course, even if they stop doing this now, it's going to take 12 years for the effects of this damage to work their way through the education system before people are getting a normal education again. So if we don't have enough raw materials to generate, to replace the petrol-driven cars that we've got, we don't have enough money to pay the pensions, and we aren't producing an education system. My question, David, is what does that mean for the economy of the country? What does that mean for the population of the country? Because what we're seeing here is a policy agenda at work, which is basically unstated. The press isn't covering this in any way, shape, or form. And at no point in that conversation did we even talk about how we generate the electricity, even if we could build the cars in the first place, how we could generate the electricity to fuel those cars. It's pretty clear to me we won't be traveling, we won't be in work, and we won't be living long enough to require a pension.
We probably won't have the cars either.
Well, in a word, what it means is serfdom. And serfs don't have cars. Serfs don't travel beyond their village. Serfs often have quite short lives. And serfs work almost all of those years that they're alive. So all of the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, all of the benefits that we have spent 150 or 200 years building from nothing, have to be removed in order for that agenda to be rolled out. Otherwise, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, this is where I come from, David. It's easy for many people to assume that, okay, we're going to make the change to electric cars, and therefore we're going to need these materials. But I actually think the policy is going to be absolutely, you are not going to be able to have a car. If you see new developments in urban areas now, the first little trick they do is they don't provide car parking. There's no driveway. There's not even necessarily the ability to park on the road. So this has been going on for many years now, and the objective has clearly been to force cars out of inner city areas with no replacements in many occasions, particularly if the accommodation is low income accommodation. So we can see through these policies the agenda is to stop people travelling. The road charging systems are all virtually in place now. If you've watched all of the chaos across Britain's motorways, and you've seen the purple cabling lying along the side of the roads, that has been all part of the fibre optic setup for road charging, and that's what all the big gantries are in place for. So shortly we're going to start to see that coming in to cut down on inter-urban, inter-city travel via the motorways.
Okay, now if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community and you can join us there. That would be very much appreciated. But also please share our stuff as it appears on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, BitChute, and now on DLive as well, and in other places upcoming. Now, a lot of people sending this through to us, so we just wanted to let everybody know about it. If you haven't seen it, the Great Reopening. The poster says we are the 99%, reopen your business. So this is for Saturday, this coming Saturday, Saturday the 30th of January. And they're saying this ends when we say no. There's a Telegram group for anybody that wants to get involved on screen at the moment. Well, I don't know who's behind it, but I think it's probably a very good initiative. We need to start seeing people pushing back against this.
Well, exactly, because until people say no, it will continue. Now, we are getting some really very interesting emails into the UK column since the curfew was in place. This one caught our eye this morning. So let's talk through this one. First of all, apologies for using your own email as a contact, or I apologise for using your own email as a contact. Today, Monday, the 25th of January, 2021, my partner in the public sector Wales has been requested to submit vehicle registration details in case there is an interruption emergency in connection with the supply of fuel. They are also being advised that by doing this, they can see if it's you and being correctly supplied, that it's you being correctly supplied fuel at the pump. And the person who sent this in has said they'd like to ask, has anyone else had this type of approach? So the only details that we know is that this is public sector somewhere in the expanse of Wales. And this is a very interesting thing, because what does this represent? That somebody in the public sector knows that there's going to be further lockdown with fuel shortages along the way, except for so-called key workers?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. Of course, in Wales at the moment, the lockdown says that you're not allowed to be more than 5 miles away from your home. So maybe that's part of it. But I'm very interested in this notion that supply chains are in some way going to be disrupted.
Yeah, so anybody who's got any information, certainly anybody who's received an equivalent communication, if you can send us anything at all to support or suggest that this is a one-off case, we'd be interested in hearing from you.
Well, here's Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Scientific Officer. He was writing in the Telegraph on Sunday, well, he had this to say. Vaccines do offer the way out of the pandemic and a return to life as we knew it, really. Well, he says that in one sentence, and then a couple of sentences later he says, no vaccine has ever been 100% effective, so no one will have 100% protection from the virus. So which is it? Are we going to be getting back to the old normal or not? I suspect not. I believe not, but he clearly isn't quite sure. He goes on to say, really importantly, we do not yet know the impact of the vaccine on transmission of the virus. So even after you've had both doses of the vaccine, you may still give COVID to someone else, and the chains of transmission will then continue. So it seems to me absolutely clear that the first sentence was a lie. We will not be getting back to the life that we knew because even with this so-called vaccine, we're still likely to be able to give COVID to someone else. Now, the government has been maintaining that there's such a thing as asymptomatic spreaders. and they've been maintaining it very, very hard over the last several months, despite the fact that the largest scientific study on this, which took place in Wuhan, showed that really there was no such thing as asymptomatic spreaders, unless, of course, you have a dual dose vaccine and you give one dose of it, and then you wait to see whether that creates asymptomatic spreaders, because of course the vaccine doesn't provide real immunity, it only pushes down on the symptoms. So you're asymptomatic having had the vaccine, if the vaccine works at all, and you then, as Van Tam has said in this article, may then become a spreader yourself.
I just wanted to say, Mike, is he not telling the truth, or has the man not got the intellectual ability to understand the words coming out of his own mouth? Is he stupid, is really what we need to ask. Is he so stupid that he doesn't understand what he's saying, or is this a deliberate political lie in order to get this agenda across? Which is it, do you think?
I think it's the second of those, and I think it's the second of those because it was a written article, therefore it was considered, the words were considered. It wasn't him giving a presentation on a live stream off the cuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, then on Sky TV, Dr. Rosie Shar was on. She's from the Doctors Association in the UK, and she had this to say about the vaccine.
It would be great if we could say, yes, they're going to have some level of immunity that will continue after that 3-week dose. But think about the worst case scenario, that after 3 weeks, that immunity just wanes completely. Or maybe if we then give the booster at 12 weeks, that's just not good enough. The fact is that people are being vaccinated now, and they're being put into what is effectively an unregulated, unlicensed trial, whereby they're receiving this vaccination on the understanding that then they don't know what's going on.
So that's pretty clear, David, and she's absolutely right. It is an unregulated trial because, of course, the temporary approval by the MHRA was on the basis of 2 doses 3 weeks apart, and the clinical trials, as far as they go, and we don't have any of the actual data from those yet, from the Pfizer trials. The clinical trials were based on 2 doses 3 weeks apart. So she's absolutely right. This is effectively an unregulated, unapproved clinical trial that's going on at the moment.
Well, yes. I would point out that there has never been any vaccine where we've got double-blind, placebo-controlled trials to show that it's safe and effective, let alone the entire vaccine schedule. So the entire vaccine program could be viewed as an enormous unlicensed trial, and this is just the most recent and perhaps most grievous example of it. But she is correct.
She is correct. Well, let's bring in Professor Anthony Harland then, who's the Deputy Chair of the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. And he said, oh, you don't need to worry because there's no real evidence that a quicker follow-up dose is more effective. Well, that's true because there's no evidence at all for any of this. There are no proper clinical trials to provide any evidence. So, okay, no real evidence that a quicker dose, that a quicker follow-up dose is more effective. He went on to say, we do believe you should have a second dose, but we do believe that that can be delayed. Right, on the basis of what? On the basis of nothing. So this is the Deputy Chair of the JCVI who really is making statements again, Brian, which can only be considered a lie because he has no data on which to
Well, it's all based
stand.
on what he believes. I believe a lot of things, but if we come down to the virus and virus transmissions, then my professional knowledge is very limited. But these people are supposedly very knowledgeable, but he's only talking about his beliefs. So something's wrong, isn't it?
Yes. Now, David, the question then of whether the vaccine creates COVID itself, well, Israel has something to say about this.
Yes, Israel's a very interesting example because Israel has pushed on with the vaccine program more rapidly, far more rapidly than any other nation in the world. I think the UK is second or third in those league tables, but Israel's far, far ahead So they've been pushing hard with the vaccine and rolling it out amongst the population. This is one of the headlines that have resulted from Israeli national news. 4,500 people diagnosed with COVID after getting the first vaccine dose. So the Dr. Elrai Price noted that 17%, this is 1 in 6, of the severely ill patients who are currently hospitalized in Israel have actually received the first dose of the vaccine before their hospitalization. That's the data shows that 4,500 people have been diagnosed with coronavirus after having received the first vaccine dose, 375 of whom have been hospitalized due to the disease. Of those hospitalized, 244 were hospitalized in the first week after the vaccination, 124 in the second week, and seven more than 15 days from when they received the vaccine. The number of verified cases has reached a new high and past the point of 9,000 positive tests. There's never been such a figure. And she blames the British mutation, so we're afraid of the South African and the Brazilian mutation. In Israel, they're afraid of the British mutation is spreading into the community, not just in people who've returned from England. There's no doubt the increase in morbidity is due to the mutation, she added, clarifying that the morbidity rates would not be brought down quickly. So she's saying there's a big problem here, and it would appear on the surface that the vaccine is less effective than one might have hoped.
What about in India?
Well, India is very interesting. So this is a local paper from two of the Indian states, the Telugu states, that's Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So they're saying is a series of deaths in frontline workers' communities who took vaccinations have been raising tensions. Within 4 days in these two states, 4 deaths, which are now turned into main concern in the medical communities in the states. So they report here a 42-year-old health worker took 1 shot and died within hours after getting vaccinated. The suspicious death toll reached 4 on Sunday. They also report that the death of health workers who administered vaccine set new tensions in the workers who are yet to be, the death of health workers who are administered vaccine set new tensions in the workers who are yet to be inoculated. Severe headache and chest pain are common symptoms. The government and doctors are making it clear that the vaccination has nothing to do with the deaths. We hear this all the time, but increasingly there are concerns raised. Now, there's the doctors and the government saying there's nothing to see here, but elsewhere in India, there are doctors speaking out. So this is from Outlook magazine, asking the question, how safe is it to have sex after you take COVID vaccine? Experts advise caution. So they note here that one of the recruitment criteria for male volunteers with reproductive potential says the use of condoms to ensure effective contraception with a female partner and to refrain from sperm donation from the first vaccination until at least 3 months after the last vaccination is a requirement of the trial. Now, what they're asking is if that's a requirement of the trial on which the safety case for the vaccine was made, should it be a requirement of the rollout of the vaccine? So Dr. Prakash Kothari, renowned sexologist, says, quote, we don't know the teratogenic effects, that's abnormal fetal development effects, of a vaccine, as it's too early to investigate that. However, if such a condition has been imposed on the volunteers of the clinical trial, it indicates that there could be a probability. To what extent, we don't know, because we have rushed the vaccine through without investigating it. And he goes on to say that there are instances in the past where drugs have caused deformities in newborns, and such drugs were withdrawn later on. He adds, so I suggest that all population which have a productive age group must be advised and be cautioned to use contraceptives for 1 year after receiving the vaccine.
That's a bit problematic if we're expected to receive the vaccine every year.
well, quite.
I think that's your electric. Go ahead.
And a second Indian doctor, a Dr. Bedi, who is a gynecologist, he was critical about the process. He said rushing a vaccine is completely a political agenda, and it's nothing to do with healthcare management. Since vaccines are still at the experimental stage, even in the ongoing vaccination drive, I think the condition to use condoms to ensure effective contraception applies to all the beneficiaries. So he's agreeing, and he's saying this was a requirement of the testing that verified the vaccine was safe, such as it's been, and it should be applied to the population receiving the vaccine. And of course, it has not been. So this is two doctors speaking out here. And of course, there are, as people who are familiar with what's currently circulating on the internet, hundreds and hundreds of medical professionals raising concerns from all sorts of different angles and all sorts of different perspectives and different specialisms about the safety, necessity, and efficacy of the current vaccine program.
Yes. Well, let's move on back to the UK then, and to Scotland, in fact, and the number of people who are confirmed to have died of rather than with COVID-19. And so you want to highlight a freedom of information answer from Grampian?
Yeah, just a little data point here, because it's necessary to keep a handle on just what is happening, what the reality is. So this is Grampian NHS Board. It serves Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Moray. And that's a population of just over 500,000. So the Freedom of Information request asks how many COVID deaths from February to November. And when the answer came back, it clarified it was up to the 25th of November. So in this 500,000 population, the listed deaths where COVID-19 is the sole cause of death as confirmed 15 and suspected 5. And that's in the entire quote pandemic for the entire year. So it just is another data point where we're talking about something which for the healthy population is whatever you think it is and whatever you think it isn't, is of very small importance in terms of the risk of death or serious injury. And against this, we're doing all of the shutdown, we're causing the mental health crisis, we're causing the economic collapse, all of which will cost life. And it just illustrates the nature of the decisions that have been made by the government and the illogicality and unscientific nature of the reasoning.
Yes.
David, when I see that data that you put up on screen, I instantly thought of the statistics that came out of NHS Cornwall as a result of a nurse, a care assistant speaking out, Shelley Tasker. And if I remember rightly, it was those sorts of levels of COVID figures in the whole of Cornwall, 5 people in the hospitals who had died. I haven't got those figures in front of me, but I know that we're talking about at least parity of figures here. And of course, what was the response? That this lady has got to be effectively crushed and silenced by the NHS for daring to release data, which was data that the public were entitled to get anyway. So this censorship...
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that we were reporting doctors speaking out in India and speaking out in Germany and speaking out in America is it's so difficult. I mean, many brave souls are doing it in the UK as well, but they're doing it against a huge amount of pressure, threats of loss of jobs, threats of loss of career from our own NHS.
Okay, so let's move on then. And what's Richard Littlejohn been talking about? Headline in the Mail this weekend: "Don't clean your teeth, save the NHS. A look forward to COVID Britain in 2024."
So yes, Littlejohn here is taking the mickey, and God bless him for that. He says that he writes, "The date is March the 1st, 2024, and Britain is about to enter its 5th year of lockdown. Despite the entire population being vaccinated every 6 months and the death toll from COVID-19 falling to 0, scientists are still warning that it's too early to ease restrictions. And the Old Bailey anti-lockdown campaigner Piers Corbyn is jailed for life after being found guilty of failing to wear a mask in his own bathroom while cleaning his teeth. Corbyn was arrested during a dawn raid by armed police, executing a warrant under the new Contagious Diseases Safety of Ablutions Serious Offences Act." And he continues, "A civic-minded neighbour using night vision binoculars rang Scotland Yard's dedicated COVID narc line after spotting the maskless Corbyn through a frosted glass window, spitting toothpaste into the sink and rinsing it down the plug hole. Despite the fact there's no evidence of anyone falling ill after contracting a toothpaste-related COVID variant, scientists have warned that if a single droplet of human saliva contaminates the water supply, it could result in the death of hundreds of millions of people. At yesterday's 5 o'clock news conference, Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared that the blanket policy of stay home, stop cleaning your teeth, protect the NHS has been a roaring success.
To which, David, I say I don't like to be a killjoy, and it's good to have the humour. But the bit that I always come back to is the fact that Little John clearly thinks that the events he can see happening are crazy. They're just ridiculous. They're nonsense. And therefore he can come out with his black humour. What he doesn't understand is that the crazy mixed messages are fully part of the psychological attack which is the government is carrying out in order to interfere with people's thinking and their mental health. So whilst I applaud him for making us laugh, at least with reading that article, I'm afraid I can't help thinking that Little John still does not understand what's really coming down the pipeline, and he needs a bit of public attention to help him get onto the right way of thinking. But maybe I'm being a bit tough.
Where does that take us?
Well, it takes us to the Independent, and I've been paying attention to what's reported, and I catch up little things. Here's part of an article that the Independent was pushing out, talking about films coming out, talking about viral epidemics and lockdowns, and some of them it was praising and some it wasn't. But this is the end of the particular article, and it said the film was written, shot and wrapped in a few months and is bursting with cameos since so many high-profile actors were essentially out of work. But even if the reviews haven't been stellar, critics have conceded that it still shows a brutal honesty about the cyclical strain of endless bread baking and stilted FaceTime conversations as Polygon's Quincy Lagarde notes. Locked Down might just be the most realistic depiction of the early days of COVID. So suddenly out of nowhere we're getting all of these films. And I just noticed that in this paragraph here, we're simply not at the stage where we can process the full weight of the pandemic, but there are ways cinema can comfort and acknowledge the reality of the now with a dash of humour, horror, or plain sincerity. If you just put that back on the screen, Mike, because the question is, David, how do we use horror to comfort the public? And if that is, if that's a bit of a clash in that man's mind, the journalist's mind, a bit of cognitive dissonance, we're looking at breakdown. We can't even have a reporter that understands the words that he's putting on the paper.
I have no answer to that, Brian. I don't understand how horror would be comforting in any way. And if you're talking about a situation which in reality is horrific, why depicting horror in a fictional setting that's related to it would help, I've not got the foggiest.
Yeah. Well, I'll let people think about that. But if you do look at what the media is saying and printing, we're finding more and more of these bizarre little contradictions as the journalists can't really make any sense of the world around them and can't rationalize their own so-called analysis. Let's hop across to the States, and I couldn't resist coming in at this angle. It's New York Times with this wonderful picture of, well, this is Western greeting now, Mike. We should try it more often. What's the actual headline? Lloyd Austin is confirmed becoming the first black defense secretary in US history. And of course, this is making sort of big waves through the media because he's a black man. So what does the BBC have to say? Well, there's the title, Lloyd Austin, Biden picks ex-general as defense secretary. This is, of course, very big news. They say quite a lot in the article, but this is one of the key things. But the nomination could draw criticism from some progressive groups over General Austin's position in recent years as a member of the board of directors of defense contractor Raytheon, and opposition from lawmakers in Congress who favor a clear civilian control of the Pentagon. Now, we'll explain why this has come about, what the limitation is, but what we can see is of course people coming straight out of the military into those defence contractors, and in this case hopping straight back into a prime government role.
No conflict of interest there.
No conflict of interest there at all. So this is the limitation. The required congressional waiver is that you must be out of the military for over 7 years, but he's been granted that waiver, although it's only been granted twice, most recently in the case of James Mattis, the retired Marine General who served as President Donald Trump's first defense secretary. So shock horror, they should have followed the precedents with Trump there, but let's follow on through. So Austin oversaw the largest logistical operation undertaken by the Army in 6 decades, the Iraq drawdown. I think that means withdrawal, but
yes.
The Iraq drawdown. So why is this important? Well, let's give you the real news. This is because apparently Mr. Biden wrote that the next Secretary of Defense will need to immediately quarterback an enormous logistics operation to help distribute COVID-19 vaccines widely and equitably. So you want this general who specialised in a massive logistics operation to draw down in Iraq. You need him now on the job in the US because he's going to be helping with those COVID jabs. So let's have a look, because the BBC put up a very wonderful picture of the two men talking. We were able to get an exclusive on what was being said here. So Mr. Biden said, "So you're in, but I just have to check the details with President Kamala and her civil rights groups." Yes, I did say that correctly. I just have to check the details with President Kamala and her civil rights groups. And don't worry, the Reverend Al Sharpton has said that your appointment as Defence Secretary is a step in the right direction, but not the end of the walk. Well, the General had a response. He said, "Don't worry, your pretty little ass, Creepy Joe. I'll get the COVID-19 vaccine into the US public, whether they want it or not." And he added a bit, he'd already taken care of the most important defence policy issue. Now, David, I'd like to just ask you unfairly live on air if you might guess what the critical defence issue is in the United States, but luckily it's been taken care of.
Well, I would guess it's administering COVID vaccine, and this is the very man. This is the man you want. This is a wonderful appointment by the Biden healthcare team, because when he left the military, he also went on the board of Fortune 500 company Tenet Healthcare Corporation. And even more good news, and we like good news, since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, the share price of Tenet Healthcare Corporation has increased from $10 a share to over $50 a share. Isn't that good news?
Well, it is good news, and we always welcome it when people can benefit out of a pandemic. It's good business. So what was the real issue, aside from delivery of vaccines in US? Let's have a look at what he said he'd already dealt with, and it's the subject of transgender. So here we are, Biden to drop Trump's military transgender ban. And the General was straight in commenting that he said he supported the plan. And this is the actual report in the paper. So this isn't an error of the UK column. I support the plan or plan to overturn the transgender ban. So that's the most important thing, to get transgender people into the American military. And apparently all 4 service chiefs told Congress in 2018 that they'd seen no discipline, morale or unit readiness problems with transgender troops serving openly in the military, but they did acknowledge that some commanders were spending a lot of time with transgender individuals who were working through medical requirements and other, quote, transition issues. So I'm going to label this that this is in the midst of the COVID pandemic chaos and a new president. The US military is rushing through the drive to intersectionality. That's the political agenda. Let's swap to Boris, because the Daily Mail here telling us that Boris Johnson is to give Liz Truss a more senior government role as he plans to promote a raft of female ministers in a cabinet reshuffle. So very important that the ladies are now coming into the administration. I'm really pleased to see that they're wearing some particularly sharp outfits. But what is this about? Well, this is in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The Conservatives are bringing in intersectionality. So what we've got to pay attention for is this underlying political agenda. If you don't know what intersectionality is, have a little look on the internet because it's everywhere. I chose Womankind Worldwide. They've got a very good description. It's an interlinking of all the things that can cause problems in the way we think about other individuals. So this is their paragraph definition. Put simply, intersectionality is the concept that all oppression is linked. More explicitly, the Oxford Dictionary defines intersectionality as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, regarded as creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or advantage. So this has now become priority. We're going to see more and more of this coming into UK and the US. And this is going to drive the agenda, never mind defending continental US against the nasty Chinese and the Russians. So what has Boris been adding to this? Well, here's his Twitter, and I couldn't resist this one. He said, "Great to speak to President Joe Biden this evening. I look forward to deepening the long-standing alliance between our two countries as we drive a green and sustainable recovery from COVID-19, which ties in nicely with your Davos opening, Mike. So really, the conversation was a bit different. Yup, creepy Joe. So the UK public is to be told we just don't have a real answer for this incredibly dangerous mutating COVID-19 virus. So stay in lockdown at home and let us get on with the real work of a green and sustainable recovery. Yeah, they're all stupid. Let's cull them. I'm pretty confident that's what was said, but possibly he didn't say that. So he added this with a tweet that we vaccinated over 5.8 million people in the UK with a record 478,000 doses given in a single day yesterday. So every jab brings us closer to defeating the virus, although we've clearly shown in this news today, Mike, that's not true. So presumably, when we're called forward to go into the safety of the camps, people will just come forward because we can trust him. And if that's not bad enough, I'm just going to add that this man, Gordon Brown, has been called forward. So the country's virtually on its knees socially and in an economic sense under the COVID so-called pandemic. So we're bringing in a man who previously wrecked the country, but the BBC is very, very pleased because Gordon Brown has said that trust has broken down in the way the UK is run. I'm amazed that they've had to find that out from Gordon Brown. So what's Gordon been saying? He said the pandemic has brought to the surface tensions and grievances that have been simmering for years between Downing Street and the various parts of the UK. He says that he thinks the public are fed up. I think in many ways they feel they're being treated as second-class citizens, particularly in outlying areas that they are invisible and forgotten. But he's calling on Boris Johnson to immediately set up a commission on democracy to review how the UK is governed, something the Conservatives promised in their manifesto before the last general election. Now, I've labelled him as the former failed UK Prime Minister, which is, I think, pretty accurate. We also would like to know from Gordon where our gold reserves went, because, of course, he sold those off. But the BBC here telling us very clearly that Mr. Brown is advising the Labour Party on its devolution strategy. And he's held talks with government ministers, including Michael Gove, in recent weeks. So, David, I've got to say, with a little bit of a sting in the tail, that Gordon Brown, I think, comes from north of the border. So maybe we should point a little bit of responsibility at his efforts to the Scottish population. But he's been brought into the mix in order to solve all of our problems by saying we're going to rethink the whole way the country is governed. Does this bring you any sort of confidence?
Gordon Brown has never brought me any sort of confidence. and it's quite unfair of you trying to apply collective responsibility and blaming us for Gordon. And, right, because if you start that, somebody will point out that Blair, despite the fact that he tried very hard to pretend to be English, was in fact born in Scotland, and in fact educated in Scotland, and we're somehow responsible for him too. This is too much for any small nation to bear, so I would appreciate you not going there. A commission on democracy, is he kidding me on? If we want a real commission in democracy, what we should do is watch the UK column series, The Dissident's Guide to the Constitution. We're a half or maybe only a third of the way through, considering in some detail the problems of democracy. And the problems mean that the people in far-flung parts of the UK, or indeed in parts of the UK just round the corner from Westminster, are not second-class citizens, right? They're lucky if they're fourth-class citizens. That's the problem with democracy, and that's one that they will not be addressing.
Thank you for that. And I realise I might have been a little bit harsh on the Scottish nation. However, it does provide a nice little segue, a little link into what's been happening into Scotland, what's been happening in Scotland, and indeed with Nippy, I think.
Yeah, we don't need, Brian, we don't need you to be harsh on the Scottish nation. That's what you've got me for. Now, on to the Herald. And you've also this week got Ian McWhirter doing this. Right, so the theme for the week is fish. Salmon and sturgeon. And also, Ian McWhirter writes, like a fish, Scotland's Crown Office is rotting from the head down. So he writes here, 14 million, 20 million, 24 million. The eye-watering sum in damage has been awarded to the administrators wrongly prosecuted for fraud over the Rangers, that's the Glasgow Rangers Football Club, bankruptcy, seems to grow larger by the day. It's reliably reported that the two men, Paul Clark and David Whitehouse, have already banked 10 million apiece, 10 million each. The various legal fees are now going to take the total bill up to around 24 million. But it gets worse. The Lord Advocate himself, James Wolfe QC, will shortly make a public apology to the two men for having pursued a, quote, malicious prosecution against them, quote, without probable cause, end quote. Malicious, note, not just mistaken in law or based on unreliable evidence, but acting with malice, the intention of personally injuring two innocent citizens. Forget reputational damage to the Crown Office. This is reputational obliteration. What were we saying last week? The Crown Office is organised crime. Now, he continues on looking at the Sturgeon case. When Linda Fabiani, who's heading the inquiry into the Salmond affair, where Salmond was taken to an internal disciplinary process, essentially found guilty by the Scottish Government, challenged it at law, and the government's case collapsed within a day. And then Salmond had to be awarded £500,000 in legal costs. That scandal, you've got to be specific as to which scandal we're talking about. The committee looking into that wrote asking for information to the Crown Office. The Crown Office wrote back saying there was no legal basis for this request, and that releasing witness statements would leave a significant risk that this would undermine public confidence in both the police and the Crown Office. And McWhirter writes, you might think it would be hard for the public confidence to be undermined any further than it already has been. And he continues here, so the Crown Office has also threatened Alex Salmond with prosecution if he released any of the incriminating material that he himself has seen during his judicial review. So that it's clear that there's a cover-up. I mean, we're not even covering up the cover-up anymore, such is the banana republic nature of Scotland under the SNP. And the prosecutors and senior politicians are in an incestuous embrace. There's evasion and lack of transparency. And he concludes, I fear there's a culture of collusion and cover-up, and I believe there's an ethical void at the prosecution service. This is intolerable in a democracy. I'm not so sure about that. And ample evidence that the Crown Office is not fit for purpose. That is quite correct. So the Crown Office, run by Mr. Wolfe QC, who sits at the cabinet, is a political appointee, and he sits at the cabinet table with Nicola Sturgeon, he runs both the all prosecution in Scotland and also provides services, legal services to the state, to the government. So it's the state's own lawyer that prosecutes people in Scotland, which is an appalling situation and an obvious invitation to political control of the prosecutorial process.
So just effectively a corrupt state under the SNP, with no separation of the powers at all. So the one police force fully integrated with that judicial system. So this is a dictatorship north of a corrupt dictatorship north of the border, David.
That's correct. A corrupt dictatorship is the correct way of describing it. There are no checks, there are no balances, and it's being applied without even a hint of concern for the public or of humility. It's being applied with arrogance and a kind of power-hungry tone that is Stalinist in its style. That's what we're living with. But there are one or two reasons to be cheerful. The Scotsman here reports the Salmon Inquiry why any witnesses who lie to the MSPs should be worried, and the reason is that they're operating under oath, and the Scottish Parliament has confirmed that if a witness gives evidence under oath which they know to be false or do not believe to be true, they are committing a criminal offence with a maximum prison term of 5 years. So we'll see if anyone goes to jail.
Okay, well, we got to end, but David, let's end with your cartoon here.
Beautiful cartoon. So here we see the Scot of the Antarctic. Oates is saying, "I'm just going outside. I may be some time." And he's only just left the tent. And Scott turns around and says, "Call the police."
Call the police. We're in a lockdown.
Well, curfew, Mike. I think we've got to get rid of this lockdown term and call it curfew. David, thank you very much for joining us today. Fascinating to know what's going on north of the border. What a perilous state the UK is in. What can we do about it? We need to push out the facts, the truth about what's really happening with COVID, and we need to watch our government like a hawk to see the policies and agendas that it's putting into place under the smokescreen of the so-called COVID pandemic. So we're going to do our best to help keep your eye on what is happening there.
Are we doing an extra?
I'm very happy to do an extra if David is free for an extra. Yep. He's nodding, so we will be doing an extra after the news. We'll say thank you to everyone for joining us, and I'm going to keep pushing out a very big thank you to all the people who are now becoming viewers and listeners to UK Column from overseas. We know that our overseas audience is really growing, and as always, a big thank you to the people in the United States, because it seems that we're sharing this common political dictatorship at the moment. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.